In the heart of Ouagadougou, where the sun scorches the dusty streets and time seems suspended in the heat, Ibrahim Traoré awoke to another day under the immense weight of leading a nation. Known for his firm stance and unwavering resolve, he was seen by many as a man of few words, but of decisive action. If you believe that even a small nation can stand tall against great power, if you believe that Africa deserves to write its own destiny, if you see the unyielding fire in Captain Traoré's eyes, then like the video and subscribe to the channel, not just to support, but to stand with us. Stand with a wave of awakening, a wave of pride, of the new African spirit. This is not just the story of Burkina Faso. This is a call to all who still believe in justice, freedom, and honor. Together, we won't just witness history, we will write it. And yet, that morning, something different drew his attention. On his desk at the presidential palace lay a simple envelope. No markings, no emblem, no sender's name. Just his own, elegantly written across the front in unfamiliar handwriting. Traoré paused, his brow furrowed. He picked it up with care, as if the paper itself held something fragile. For a moment, he hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a single sheet. His eyes moved swiftly to the bottom. The signature hit him like a thunderclap, Didier Drogba. A name that echoed not only in stadiums, but in the hearts of millions. A symbol of unity. A man who had once stopped a civil war with nothing but his voice and his presence. A legend, not just in football, but in courage. How did this reach me? Traoré wondered, as his fingers trembled ever so slightly. Outside, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the marble corridors. But inside, in that moment, there was only silence and the steady beating of a heart confronted by something unexpected. He began to read. The first lines were warm, filled with respect and admiration. Drogba spoke not just as a fan of leadership, but as a fellow bearer of pressure. He wrote of seeing in Traoré a man who, like him in critical moments, had carried an entire nation on his shoulders. He wrote of sacrifice. Of choices made not for comfort, but for principle. Of the weight of expectation, and the loneliness of integrity. Traoré felt something unfamiliar stir within him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even admiration. It was connection. As if across distance and difference, one man had reached another, not through politics or protocol, but through shared purpose. He read on. The letter didn't instruct. It didn't flatter. It invited. It asked the quiet questions that few ever dared to say aloud. What legacy do you want to leave? What will your people remember, not of your rank, but of your courage? For a brief moment, the burden on his back seemed lighter. The walls of the palace less cold. Later that day, during a strategic meeting, Traoré couldn't hold it in. I received something unusual today, he said softly. A letter, from Didier Drogba. The room paused. Faces turned. Even those less familiar with global football understood the weight of the name. He didn't share all the details, some things were too personal. But he spoke of the impact it had left on him. Not as a head of state, but as a man. That night, before the lights dimmed and the city fell quiet, he placed the letter in a private drawer. He knew he would return to it. Often. And as he walked alone through the quiet corridors of the palace, one question echoed in his mind. What did he really mean with those words? Does he know the weight they carry? Those thoughts lingered, through meetings, through decisions, through every brief silence between two demands. One line, in particular, would not let go of him. Sometimes the greatest strength lies not in raising weapons or building walls. And Traoré, for the first time in a long while, found strength in something else. Reflection. But in reaching out, and building bridges. That line. It clung to him like a whisper meant only for his ears. Later that day, in a closed meeting with his inner circle, including his right-hand advisor, Carlos Mendoza, a Colombian strategist who had become more than an ally, a friend, Traore brought it up. "Do you know Didier Drogba?" he asked hesitantly. Carlos smiled. "Of course I do. He's more than a football player. He's a man who used his voice to bring a divided country back together." Traore nodded. But there was something in his expression, something deeper. A storm brewing quietly behind the eyes. As the conversation unfolded, he shared excerpts from the letter, omitting the personal parts, but not the emotional weight. Carlos listened carefully, then finally said, "This letter arrived at a crucial moment. Maybe it's a sign that it's time to look beyond the battles of today and think about the legacy you want to leave behind." The words struck Traore like lightning. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. If you believe that even a small nation can stand tall against great power. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own destiny. If you see the unyielding fire in Captain Traore's eyes. Then like the video and subscribe to the channel, not just to support, but to stand with us. Stand with a wave of awakening, a wave of pride, of the new African spirit. This is not just the story of Burkina Faso. This is a call to all who still believe in justice, freedom, and honor. Together, we won't just witness history, we will write it. That evening, he met with his younger sister, Rosa, a passionate social worker leading initiatives for marginalized women. She noticed the change in his face immediately. "You look different," she said, concerned. He hesitated, then handed her the letter. Rosa read it silently. Her eyes welled up. "This is powerful," she whispered. She didn't stop there. "You have the power to do something truly meaningful here, Ibrahim. Don't waste that. Don't just rule. Lead." He said nothing. But the words echoed. Over and over. By nightfall, Traore had made a decision. He wouldn't just carry Drogba's words. He would act on them. He would do something different. As he prepared for sleep, a single thought emerged with rare clarity: maybe it's time to change my leadership style. The idea brought both calm and fear. Later that night, without the usual motorcade or security phalanx, he did something rare. He walked the streets of Ouagadougou alone. He needed to feel the city, not from a palace balcony, but from its beating heart. He passed children playing barefoot in the dust, shopkeepers locking up, families gathering around small fires. The city breathed around him. Unfiltered. Honest. Then, he stopped. Under a dim street lamp, a group of teenagers kicked a ball back and forth, laughing, shouting, living. He stood motionless, watching. "Football has always been more than a game," he whispered. "It's a universal language." And suddenly, the meaning behind Drogba's letter struck him fully. It wasn't about admiration. It was a mirror. A challenge. A reminder that symbols matter, that leaders who dare to inspire, can shift the soul of a nation. Back at the palace, he found Rosa waiting. "You've changed," she said gently. Traore nodded. "That letter, it made me realize I must do more than govern. I must inspire." Carlos arrived shortly after, bringing unsettling news. "There are protests," he said quietly. "In the north. The people are tired. They want real change." Traore didn't respond. But his silence wasn't hesitation. It was resolve. He knew now, he had to act. He still wasn't entirely sure how. But that night, before sleep took him, Ibrahim Traoré made a promise to himself. He wouldn't just carry Drogba's words in his heart, he would turn them into something real. Something lasting. Maybe it's time to change my leadership style, he thought as he lay in the quiet. The idea brought clarity, but also uncertainty. Change is rarely comfortable. But it was necessary. The next morning, Traoré did something no one expected. He called a press conference. If you believe that even a small nation can stand tall against great power. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own destiny. If you see the unyielding fire in Captain Traoré's eyes. Then like the video and subscribe to the channel, not just to support, but to stand with us. Stand with a wave of awakening, a wave of pride, of the new African spirit. This is not just the story of Burkina Faso. This is a call to all who still believe in justice, freedom, and honor. Together, we won't just witness history, we will write it. When he walked into the room, journalists noted something different in his face, an unusual mix of gravity and vulnerability. Gone was the unshakable shield. In its place stood a man deeply moved. He began not with policy, but with a confession. He spoke of the letter from Didier Drogba. Of how it had pierced through the noise of politics and touched something far more personal. These words made me realize, he said softly, that as a leader, my role is not just to protect my people, but to inspire them to build something greater. Then, his tone shifted. With firm conviction, Traoré unveiled a bold new initiative, a national peace program, inspired by Drogba's efforts during the Ivorian crisis. The program aimed to unite Burkina Faso's diverse ethnic and political groups through sports, education, and structured dialogue. I want all of us, he said, voice trembling with emotion, to be the architects of a new Burkina Faso. The room fell silent. Not out of confusion, but because hearts were moved. Later that day, he received a message. From Drogba. His response was short, but powerful. Your decision to act, that is the true legacy. Traoré read the message in private. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to cry. It wasn't weakness. It was release. It was transformation. Rosa and Carlos stood with him every step of the way. Together, they rolled out the peace initiative, organizing football matches, youth summits, public debates. They traveled from village to village, from city centers to remote provinces. And Traoré didn't just endorse the program. He lived it. He walked among the people. Listened to their fears. Learned from their wisdom. Celebrated their resilience. And little by little, the change became visible. Tensions eased. Communities once divided began to meet, on fields, in classrooms, at local halls. The true power of words wasn't just in their poetry. It was in their ability to touch hearts, and reshape reality. Over the following months, Burkina Faso witnessed a shift. Not just in policy, but in spirit. The peace program grew stronger, communities gathered more often, and a leader once seen as distant became known simply as present. Carlos, Rosa, and other close advisors noticed it too. You've changed, Rosa told him one day. It's like you finally discovered who you really are. Traoré smiled. I think I've finally understood. Leadership isn't about control. It's about inspiring others to become more. And so, the letter from Drogba, what once seemed a kind gesture, became something far greater. A catalyst. A mirror. A movement. Because real power lies not in commanding others to act, but in awakening something within them. Words have the power to touch hearts, and transform reality. That, Ibrahim Traoré would never forget. By the end of that year, Burkina Faso was on the path to healing. The divisions that once fractured the nation were slowly replaced by a new spirit, of unity, of progress, of hope. There was still much to be done. But for the first time in a long time, the road ahead felt possible. And years later, when journalists would ask him what moment had defined his leadership, he always said the same thing. The letter from Didier Drogba. That letter taught me that a leader's true impact isn't measured only by decisions, he'd explain in interviews, but by the connections they create. Under Traoré's guidance, Burkina Faso prospered. It became a symbol across the region, not of perfection, but of resilience and possibility. He never forgot the lesson, that like football, life is not about building walls. It's about building bridges. And sometimes, it's the quiet moments, not the public speeches or grand gestures, that define a lifetime. In the years that followed, Traoré could often be seen walking the streets of Ouagadougou, no guards, no entourage, just a man among his people. Children smiled, elders nodded, vendors waved. He had earned not just their respect, but their love. And in his heart, he knew he had honored Drogba's legacy in his own way. The true goal, he would often say, is not scored on the field, but in the hearts of those we inspire. That phrase became his mantra, and, eventually, a national proverb. A reminder to all Burkinabe that words matter. That actions matter. That one act of courage, one message of hope, can reshape the destiny of many. Carlos and Rosa stood by him through it all. Together, they launched new initiatives, strengthened the peace programs, and expanded education and health services to reach every corner of the nation. They knew the work would never be finished. But they were proud of what they had built, and of who they had become. And when the time came for Traoré to step down, he did not leave with fanfare or celebration. He left with a letter. A letter addressed to the people of Burkina Faso. He thanked them for walking with him, for challenging him, for believing in something greater. He reaffirmed his trust in the future of the country, and his faith in its next generation. Our legacy, he wrote, is peace. And our mission is to keep it alive. And somewhere, perhaps in another part of Africa, a young person read that letter and decided, not just to lead, but to inspire. If you believe that even a small nation can stand tall against great power. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own destiny. If you see the unyielding fire in Captain Traoré's eyes. Then like the video and subscribe to the channel, not just to support, but to stand with us. Stand with a wave of awakening, a wave of pride, of the new African spirit. This is not just the story of Burkina Faso. This is a call to all who still believe in justice, freedom, and honor. Together, we won't just witness history, we will write it. The sun had just begun to rise over Ouagadougou when a small delegation from Senegal arrived, quietly, without fanfare. They didn't come as diplomats or politicians, but as witnesses to something greater. Word of Burkina Faso's transformation under Ibrahim Traoré had spread across borders, carried by whispers, headlines, and the kind of hope that doesn't need translation. Among them was Ibrahim Traoré, a young activist whose presence commanded attention not with force, but with clarity. She had read about the letter from Didier Drogba, followed the launch of the peace program, and watched the country she once thought too distant become a symbol of what was possible. At the palace gates, Ibrahim waited, not with soldiers or spectacle, but with Rosa at his side and Carlos standing just behind. When Isita stepped forward, there was no ceremony, just a single sentence. "We didn't come to observe," she said. "We came to learn how a letter became a movement." That day, Ibrahim took them through the quiet revolutions taking place across the city. New youth centers built on former conflict zones, football fields surrounded by murals painted with messages of unity, children laughing as they kicked worn balls across dusty lots. The transformation wasn't just structural. It was spiritual. Ibrahim spoke little, but his silence carried weight. The message was already alive in the streets. That evening, seated around a low fire in the courtyard of the presidential residence, the tone shifted. The questions became personal. One, in particular, pierced the calm. If you hadn't received that letter, cite asked, would you have changed? The flames flickered between them as Traore looked up at the stars. His voice was steady when he replied, the change was already inside me. The letter just gave it permission. Rosa, quietly taking notes, paused to look at him. Carlos said nothing, but nodded. A simple truth had been spoken, and it settled over them like a shared breath. In the weeks that followed, delegations came not just from Senegal, but from Mali, Ghana, Togo, young people, teachers, poets, and farmers who had seen themselves reflected in Traore's journey. They weren't sent by governments. They were sent by conviction. Traore responded by launching a new initiative, the Pan-African Peace Fellowship, a program that would bring youth leaders from across the continent to live in communities across Burkina Faso, to learn not from theory, but from each other, through sport, storytelling, and shared silence. If you believe that even a small nation can stand tall against great power. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own destiny. If you see the unyielding fire in Captain Traore's eyes. Then like the video and subscribe to the channel, not just to support, but to stand with us. Stand with a wave of awakening, a wave of pride, of the new African spirit. This is not just the story of Burkina Faso. This is a call to all who still believe in justice, freedom, and honor. Together, we won't just witness history, we will write it. As he watched the first group of fellows arrive weeks later, stepping off buses with backpacks and nervous smiles, Ibrahim turned to Carlos and whispered, what began as a letter has become 1,000 voices. Carlos smiled and replied, and they're not writing history. They're rewriting it. In the crowd, a boy, barely 12, held up a cardboard sign he had scrawled in charcoal. It read, "Don't lead us to follow. Lead us to rise." And in that moment, Ibrahim understood something deeper than any strategy could offer. The future wasn't waiting to be built. It was already unfolding, in the footsteps of those who had finally found the courage to walk together. Weeks passed. The sun rose and fell over Burkina Faso with quiet regularity, but something beneath that rhythm had shifted. The country was no longer simply recovering, it was reimagining itself. In classrooms where chalk once wrote forgotten lessons, children now spoke of dignity. On community radios, villagers debated ideas once reserved for government halls. In stadiums, football matches ended not in rivalry but in shared chants of unity. Something had taken root, and Ibrahim Traoré watched it grow with a mix of pride and caution. He was not naive. He knew change was fragile. One morning, while walking through a small village near the southern border, he visited a youth center built from reclaimed bricks and painted by local children. Inside, a girl named Amina approached him. She could not have been older than 10, but her eyes held something ancient. "I want to be like Mariama," she said. "I want to help people feel safe." Traoré smiled, kneeling to her level. "Then promise me one thing," he said gently. "When the world tries to make you quiet, speak anyway." That night, back in the capital, Rosa found him alone on the rooftop of the palace. The city lights flickered like distant constellations. "You're restless again," she said, joining him. He nodded. "Because this isn't about me anymore." "It never was." She stayed silent, waiting. 1. And so he did. That week, Ibrahim sat down with pen and paper, not to give a speech, not to draft policy, but to write a letter. Not to a leader or a celebrity, but to the unknown reader, the forgotten youth in a forgotten town, the girl building a garden with her bare hands, the boy holding a broken ball but still dreaming of a goal. He wrote of struggle, of fear, of loneliness, but above all, of choice. The choice to resist silence. The choice to be more than a survivor. The choice to lead, even without a title. He ended it simply. History does not remember titles. It remembers those who dared to care. The letter was published anonymously and spread like wildfire across West Africa. No signature. No seal. Just words, fierce, quiet, true. Months later, as he prepared to leave office, Ibrahim walked alone through the streets of Ouagadougou. People greeted him not with bows or ceremony, but with nods of familiarity, with eyes that said, "We know you. You were one of us." On the final day of his presidency, Rosa handed him a package. Inside, a worn envelope, familiar in its simplicity. He opened it slowly. A reply. From a child in Sierra Leone. Written in pencil, it said, "Your letter found me. If you believe that even a small nation can stand tall against great power. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own destiny. If you see the unyielding fire in Captain Traoré's eyes. Then like the video and subscribe to the channel, not just to support, but to stand with us. Stand with a wave of awakening, a wave of pride, of the new African spirit. This is not just the story of Burkina Faso. This is a call to all who still believe in justice, freedom, and honor. Together, we won't just witness history, we will write it." And in that moment, Ibrahim Traoré knew, the most powerful legacy was never in being remembered, but in helping others remember themselves. Traoré folded the letter with care, his hands trembling. Not with age, but with something more delicate, humility. He placed it in his coat pocket and stepped outside into the morning light. The air in Ouagadougou felt different that day. Not quieter. Not louder. Just more awake. Children ran across the courtyard where soldiers once marched. Vendors opened their stalls with music playing instead of fear. The scent of roasted groundnuts mixed with the sound of laughter, normal, beautiful, human. He looked up. There were no banners. No monuments. No statues carved in his image. But on the wall of a nearby school, painted by children in colors too bold for politics, were the words he had once written without expecting to be heard. History remembers those who dared to care. He smiled, not because he had changed the world, but because he had helped it remember how. And with the letter in his pocket, the dust on his shoes, and the future in the hands of others, Ibrahim Traoré did what few leaders ever find the strength to do. He walked away. Not into silence, but into legacy. The story of Ibrahim Traoré is more than a political transformation, it is a human journey that teaches us one of the most powerful truths: the smallest acts, when rooted in sincerity, can reshape the course of a nation. At the heart of this journey lies